Welcome to the Insert to Join podcast. Today we've gathered to discuss a topic that blasted the media earlier this year and has been a hot topic of debate among gamer culture and elsewhere. Let's introduce the squad from top to bottom in the Discord lineup, and then Jonathan will get us started on the discussion by introducing our topic. Let's start with you, Hooj.
Yeah, hello. Hey, it's Hoosier boy. What's up?
Well, I guess that means I'm next. What's going on? It's Jonathan Team here.
What's going on, everybody? Lupo here.
Sorry, guys. It's our first podcast. What do you want from us?
First, I want to welcome everybody back. Hope everybody had a safe and enjoyable 4th of July week. We did take the time off last week so that we could spend some time with our family and friends and enjoy the holiday. But we also kind of took that time, as Andy pointed out, is kind of a hot topic that's been coming around. We needed the time to research this topic when we first decided on it. And that is that if you've been paying attention at all, the World Health Organization has finally, after 3 years of discussion, officially named the gaming disorder as an official disorder. So I think the way we should begin this, boys, is we should first kind of discuss like what it is and the facts around it, how you get diagnosed for it, what causes the diagnosis, and what it stems from. So to begin, I'm going to say, it's not an easy thing to get diagnosed with. There are a lot of stipulations that come around it. So first of all, it's not a disease. So if you ever see anything written about it being a disease, it is a misprint. That is not correct. It is a disorder. And I'd say the biggest thing that has to happen to be diagnosed with this is this disorder needs to have taken over your life and put it almost in shambles for a year or more, minimum.
It's a strange guideline that they have, or that they published, that kind of says it's more than just playing games a lot. It's like playing games a lot and not socializing and not basically not doing anything else for a period of at least a year, which to me seems strange that you can quantify that, but
yeah, they've got some strong evidence in the direction of why this is a unnecessary, air quotes, diagnosis for gamers around the world. But there are some strong arguments why it shouldn't be. Quantifying this as an addiction, where there's only one other I'm going to call it a disorder as well, but there's only one other thing that can be put in the same category of this, and it wasn't recognized until the late 2000s. So that's being gambling.
Yeah, it was one of the only other instances in which there was no substance involved.
Correct. Yeah. So and that's kind of where I disagree. There is substance involved in gambling and in gaming, but it is not an outside substance. It is something produced from within yourself. It's
right.
It's those endorphins, the adrenaline, that rush,
the dopamine
you get. Exactly. That's another one. So there are measurable physical effects to this. There are 100%.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of why it's possible to quantify these kinds of things. And I think that it's maybe one of the only approaches that I actually think is worth entertaining with regards to quantifying, a specific gaming disorder. It makes sense. At first, I was really almost upset and really defensive as a gamer. Obviously, I have tons of bias.
Yeah, right. Who wouldn't be as a gamer?
Right.
How are you going to tell me that what I'm doing is not healthy? That it's a negative effect on my life?
Right. And it's not like gamers hadn't already been stigmatized enough in the past, and this was just like more ammo. And so for me, I was kind of like, no, this is not like there's no way. Like, stop pointing fingers.
As we read into it, though, one of the things that I did find, and I don't know if you found this, Andy, is that they say that of the gaming population, only about 3%.
Yeah, that's the number I ran
across. All
across.
People, only about 3% of all people, or all gamers, are susceptible to this level to be tagged with this diagnosis.
Right. And it really does come down to the fact that it's a culmination of a bunch of symptoms that happens over at least the course of a year, or that's what they suggest. It's one of those things that you, it takes time to develop this kind of disorder. It's not just something that happens. Oh, you got the new God of War and you played it for 12 hours straight. You must have a disorder. It's not like that. It's like you're not going to work. You're not like keeping up.
You haven't eaten. You haven't showered.
Yeah, exactly. It's at the neglect of other everyday things, which hopefully we I don't think we can stress that enough to say that that's probably the most important takeaway, is to shed all of the bias and say, okay, let's talk about what it really is. I play a lot of games by comparison to most of the other people that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, when it was initially pitched to me, I laughed and I was nervous at the same time and I was super defensive. So it was kind of like the big shebang. I was like, no, this is stupid. This is ridiculous. We should not be endorsing this. But I do think that it's obviously worth a podcast to this entire crew. So yeah, hopefully that's a good enough kind of breakthrough introduction to the topic. Do we want to kind of...
So let's kind of... I want to put a piece of evidence that we ran across. You linked an article that had a bunch of stories, and one of them really stuck in my head as a good example as to a proper diagnosis of this disorder, and why I really think that it's a viable thing, but it needs to be handled carefully. So names not included because they're not important. There was a kid who dropped out of high school, never graduated, lied to his parents about having fake jobs that they dropped him off to, and he went right back home to playing World of Warcraft because he was pushing to try and get into the largest guild in the game. And had a chance at it. So he just pushed at it and pushed at it and pushed at it. And this is over the course of 2 or 3 years, to the detriment of his health. He had to actually seek real psychiatric help to break away from the need of wanting to get to the next completion, get to the next reward. These tangible things, these tangible rewards that were in front of him in the game that he needed to complete to be able to do what he wanted. And it took over his life to the point where he was physically unhealthy, mentally needed the help, and his entire family life was in shambles because of everything that he had, lied to his family about. And so it's situations like that. These are the 3%.
Yeah.
That is a real diagnosis of gaming disorder. Whether people want to see it, would agree with it or not, that's when it becomes unhealthy.
Exactly. And it is also worth stressing once again that is the 3%, and that it is a really small number, but it's definitely a thing. And so that kind of brings me to, I linked another, actually it was a TEDx talk from Antonius van Rohe. I don't know how to say his name, so sorry if I butchered that.
I think you killed it, dude. Nice job.
He uses World of Warcraft as an example as well, which is understandable because it is, I would say that World of Warcraft is definitely a highly addictive game. It's an MMO. You can easily sink hundreds, if not thousands of hours into that game. So there's definitely a good reason to bring up World of Warcraft, but kind of the focus of his TED Talk was to ask questions like, does video gaming ruin people's lives? And then, so that was like the primary focus, but it was never actually the question that he wanted to answer. what he wanted to do was ask that question so that it would lead to more questions like, what's the responsibility of the player? What's the responsibility of the developers, of the people making these games? And what's the responsibility, or how do people be more aware? Now that this has kind of been classified, we can say more about it in particular than at the time when Antonius gave his talk. But he's curious about what other people can do who may know someone who seems like they're starting to develop the disorder. What are the kinds of things that they can do to be more aware, to maybe prevent these kind of behaviors and things like that? So one of the questions that I really want to ask is, I'm going to just mimic exactly what Antonius was talking about. Are these game developers who are creating AAA games that are highly addictive, what do we as a group feel like their responsibility should be with relation to how their games, or more particularly, how they know that their games will affect the gaming community?
Well, if you're gonna ask me personally, if you look at it from the perspective of a game developer or even a game publisher, that's what you want. like I don't mean to sound harsh and to be the devil's advocate of this conversation here, but
no, that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
If you are a game developer and you say, what do I want out of my game? You say, I want as many people playing this game at every moment of the day possible. So I don't think they have a responsibility to say, okay, we have to make our game less engaging so that we don't develop a problem in the future. Maybe there should be disclaimers. Like, we stream on Mixer, all of us here. And when you stream on Mixer for X amount of time, an alert comes up and says, hey, look, like, you've been streaming for a while. You should probably get up and stretch your legs, get some water, whatever like that. So I'm not saying that this is a necessary thing, but it's something in good conscience that a developer could do to prevent that process or something like that. But strictly from the aspect of saying, like, should they do something to the game itself to make it less engaging? No, I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah, I'm with Lupo on that one, man. I mean, like, the game developers, their whole point is to put out a game people want to play. But at the same time, like, maybe you start doing more consumer-friendly practices. Like, hey, we know our game's a blast, and we know we have incentives to encourage a lot of playtime, but maybe not a lot of playtime at once. So maybe that's where they start advocating for healthier lifestyle practices. Like in Mixer, they recommend you take a break. Maybe in this game, they recommend you take a break. Even Netflix does this. You binge watch a show for too long. Netflix says, hey, you still watching it? You good? And like, maybe like we laugh at those things because they seem like needless. Like, of course I want to binge watch all of Digimon, dude. Like, screw off. But like, what I mean? Just whatever it is, we laugh at it. But it's there to, check on us. It's there to like just be that little conscience, maybe that we're suppressing ourselves, just to be a little extra effort. So maybe like developers need to go that route. Be like, hey, like, we know we're creating a kick-ass game. We're loving that you enjoy it. We love that you're spending time on it. But we also like want you to succeed outside of playing our game. But like, I'm with Lupo, man. You can't fault the developers for making a game that you want to play or that consumers want to play. I think ultimately it's a big part of it is just like, how do you get that? How do you communicate that to the gamer? How do you communicate that to a person? And I really, the whole point of like, for me, my perspective on this is that this whole gaming disorder thing isn't really that different from other addictions and like other, goals. Like, think of it this way, like how many times we hear about people being a workaholic, you know what I mean? Like their career, their goals, and like they're focused 100%. On those objects and they consume their life in the exact same way. And I'd argue they adopt similar behavior, but it's in the space of their career, not in the space of gaming. And I think when we talk about this, we're usually talking about in the space of a hobby.
So, I mean, getting back to the developers, though, I'm going to bring up, this is kind of a classic game. I don't know if any of you guys have actually played it. It was originally on the PlayStation 3. It was called Journey.
I haven't played it, but I've definitely heard of it.
So Journey is one of my absolute favorite games. So one of the things that they did, and they talk about incentivizing doing well in the game, incentivizing these achievements. Journey, one of the achievements that they had for you was to not play the game for a week and then come back and play it again.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
That was one of the achievements. So that's incentivizing putting the game down. So maybe they could include things like that in the future. Incentivizing taking a break for, X period of time. Well, that means that you're probably going to go play another game and then come back to that one later. But you're breaking the monotony of that one game.
Actually, that's kind of interesting too, John, because I do think that there's probably some story or some narrative elements that you can develop to say, here's a story that you've been given, you've been consuming it for the past 4 hours. This was a major story event. Why don't you take a break and just let that digest for a little while? I think that there's actually some pretty unique opportunities. I didn't mean to interject straight into your idea, but that was
it ties together. It does. But yeah, it's incentivizing not only doing well in the game, but stepping away from the game.
Yeah, I do think that there's room enough for the developer, and one of the primary reasons why I asked this question is because I agree with everything that we've been talking about. I think that it's definitely not the sole responsibility of the developers to bring this to the forefront of their development. But I do think that they're in a unique position to create specific awareness about these kinds of things. And sometimes that's all it takes is just, if you're in a multiplayer game and you've been playing for, let's just say you're going super ham, you've been playing for 12 hours straight, and there's a little message in game or like in one of like the menus, there'll be a message that pops up that says, you've been on for 12 hours. Do you think you might want to take a break? Or something really short and sweet that is just a simple way to remind people that maybe they're spending too much time. Not that it's like, hey, don't play our game, but a way to open a conversation to say, do you realize that you've been sitting here for 12 hours? Or it would appear to the game that you've been sitting here for 12 hours?
Yeah, because like the worst thing like any developer could do is try to start that conversation with the right intention, but in a way that humiliates the gamer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of stuff that does it in like, good humor. I'm trying to think of a few examples, but like, there's always a case where like someone's jokingly saying like, oh, you're still watching this? Like, oh, you're still doing this? Like, haha, whatever. But like if they do it in like maybe the wrong situation or the wrong context, it could actually push consumers away from like, playing their game. So it definitely just needs to be in a very passive way, like in a very cautious, concerned way.
Yes, what you could do, because what I've got in my head is, you get you get like a message that pops up, and then you reward it. They come back before the time period. They don't get the reward, but they come back. They get some type of an item to help them in the game.
That's interesting. So like a reverse, or not a reverse, but like a reward system that says that like, hey, you took a 6-hour break. Here's a little special reward for coming back or something.
Correct. Yeah. Because it's like the mobile games. How they draw you in. They have special events and special items that you can only get during those events. So these would be items that you could only get by taking that break.
Yeah, and then in that sense, the break then becomes the event, right? Isn't that kind of the whole point?
That's really smart, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really smart.
That's actually incredibly smart.
Yeah. Before you mentioned Journey, I've never heard of anyone else doing that. But when you make it like an event like that, people do those events all the time, man. They do it for like Pokemon stuff. They do it for special.
Yeah, it's all mobile games do that kind of thing. They have these special events that come up, and in those events they have little micro purchases that you can make to get these special event only items.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they draw you in with it. So why not reverse that?
Yeah, that would be a very interesting practice to see put to actual use. The one thing that I'm really talking about here too is like, do we ever see a AAA title introducing anything like that? Or do we see this as like, it really is just the 3%, most people don't have a problem, there isn't any real agency to have these kinds of things?
This is kind of where I think the line gets a little gray, because when it comes to being far enough down the rabbit hole to be diagnosed correctly with gaming disorder, I do believe that there is also an issue with people trying to get away from reality because the world sucks and playing too much. And in that is causing issues for people. The newer generation is losing social ability. They're losing the ability to interact between two human beings face to face in a non-awkward manner. They don't know how to go out and have a normal conversation with a group of people and make new friends without being behind a screen, be it the screen on their phone or the screen on the computer or the screen on the TV for their console or what have you. But there's still an issue in there. But that, I think, comes down to parenting in a sense, because you have to control that as a parent.
That was one of the primary points of there was a video that I watched of Cam, who is like now leading a I can't remember exactly what the group is, but it's a group that helps you get help with
the Gamer Anonymous or whatever it is.
Yeah, something like that. But that was one of the focuses of his. He actually did a TED talk too. But that was one of the focuses of his TED talk, was to say that parents need to be involved and need to be aware and active, because I believe the direct quote is, they don't need entertainment, they need engagement. And I wholeheartedly believe in that, but I'm not too sure that there's a sole responsibility on the parents either. And Antonius mentioned the very same thing, that there is definitely a certain or a specific role that parents need to play, but it is also a delicate role, because there's a lot of really good things that can come from gaming. And if you try to restrict that too much, then that can like hinder creative thinking and all kinds of other stuff. It was really convoluted and complex. But the idea was that the parents need to be involved regardless.
There's also physical advantages, because one of the things, especially playing console, it can help nurture and increase hand-eye coordination.
Yep.
Like that is a proven fact. Console gaming can help improve hand-eye coordination.
100%.
So I mean, there's healthy things to it, but there's also a healthy amount of it.
It's weird too, right? Because now we're kind of bringing up the predisposed stigmas that like gaming is just this degenerative, awful thing that people do to waste their time. And like that again is one of those a frame of reference to where everybody that games wants to throw up their shield and say, oh no, now they're telling us that it's a disorder and everything like that. But all of this stuff really does come full circle back to the topic of gaming disorder and how to quantify that. In that there are specific advantages to be had from gaming. There are definitely disadvantages to be had from excessive anything. So that's kind of where I'm coming from mostly, is to say that like hopefully people are paying attention, that it's not just there's something called gaming disorder, and because kids don't want to do their homework and instead want to play Fortnite, then I as a parent can go and start talking to my kid's teachers about how he's got a gaming disorder. That is not what this is.
Well, yeah. you know what? I think it's funny you bring that up, because like with the current political climate and things that are going on in America, it's often defaulted as the reason for a lot of these things, that younger generations are growing up with violent video games and things like that, and automatically a lot of media is pointing the fingers at video games, like you're suggesting. But another thing that I read was a lot to do with the research being done in the World Health Organization, actually by Dr. Bean. If you don't know who Dr. Bean is, he's actually, they call him the gaming doctor. And the things that he's saying is that these agendas are actually being perpetrated by Asian culture, because it's becoming a larger thing there. Like, I believe, I don't want to be quoted on this, but I think Korea is one of the first places that normalized professional gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's becoming very normal to their culture, where a lot of Eastern culture, they have that, where if you are a particular trade, you don't even get your tools of the trade until you're very well adept at using them. Gaming's not like that. You can't be a gamer until, like, you can't be good at gaming until you have a controller in your hand. So the tool
right.
of the tool of your trade is introductory. It's not like you're a samurai and you get your sword up front because you'd be lobbing your own arm off. So I think it's just a little bit of a culture shock there. But what they did say is that it's not necessarily America, which is kind of the, to continue on the misconception that people have, that this is where these things are being perpetrated from, because it's not that. It's other parts, like we have to think globally when we say world, just because gaming culture is very popular in America, it is more popular in other parts of the world, and that's where some of these other things are being brought around from.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a great point to bring up too. There's definitely a divide, I think, in the perspectives surrounding gaming. I think that it's ultimately, and I kind of want to get everybody else's opinion on this too. Ultimately, I think that from a world standpoint, that the World Health Organization is definitely bringing to light a disorder that I believe is fair, at least at face value. So what do you guys think about, is the description that they have good enough? Is it on target? Is it a fair justification of what we as gamers might classify as a gaming disorder?
So I don't think I'd classify it as a gaming disorder per se. I say it's an issue, but I don't think it's a gaming issue. I think it's a life issue. I think it's a self-control issue. You know what I mean?
One of the things in almost every article that I read was, for people who are previously diagnosed and recovering from a gaming addiction, they do not blame games for their issue. They have like an underlying issue that led to the gaming addiction that created. So, in a lot of the cases, people were, it was depression or, other life issues, something that fed into it that led to. So is gaming always the problem? No. In some cases it may be, but in a lot of cases, for what doctors have already found, is that there were underlying symptoms, and the gaming is maybe an overlooked symptom.
I kind of want to push back on that though, because I do think that that's the primary reason why they call it a disorder, is because gaming allows for that escape from everyday life, just like what gambling is for other people who have gambling disorder or whatever it's called. Because I think that from certain underlying issues that, it's not exactly gambling or gaming that's causing the issue, but that those things act as a way to neglect facing the underlying issues at hand. And so I think that in that regard, I still think that it's pretty fair to say that it is a disorder, because it's very delicately similar to gambling disorder in the way that it is an escape, or there is something that's led a person to this method of escape, or this method of coping with something. So I do think that it's relatively fair in that regard.
Yeah, I think that it's because it's so new, it's still on very shaky ground.
I agree with that, definitely.
And it needs to be handled. I mean, diagnosing this needs to be done with kid gloves, because like you can't just. It's like back in the late 80s, early 90s, when attention deficit disorder became a thing. ADD or ADHD. Just because a kid wanted to go outside and play instead of do their homework, oh, they've got ADD. Oh, he's got ADHD. She's got ADHD. And 90% of the kids were misdiagnosed because of what the disorder technically is described as. And these kids fit it, but it's because they're kids and they wanted to be outside playing rather than doing homework.
That is
so. I can see a similarity between the two happening in front of us.
Right, and that's exactly what I was saying earlier too. That like, hopefully this isn't more ammo for parents to like jump on their kids about, oh, I can just blame it on this and not actually take responsibility for having an active, engaging role in my child's development.
Correct.
That's just one of those things that I think that as a culture, historically we've struggled with. And I definitely would agree with what you're saying, Jonathan, that there's absolutely almost too easily a way to misdiagnose, to not have a good enough understanding and enough, I guess, evidence to actually make a diagnosis. And that to me is yet another reason why I think that it's fair. What they've stated is that like this thing has to seem like a chronic condition. That they give a number of 12 months or a year, but to me that's even kind of like, there are probably ways that you can identify a disorder in any amount of time. Like, I don't think that you can just quantify that and say 12. It has to be 12 months. If it's 9.5 and they've completely neglected everything, and they're barely surviving, like, that's still a problem. I don't think that you can just say it's got to be 12 months for it to be a disorder. But that, to kind of bring this back to what I was saying earlier, there's definitely a misconception, or there can be, it is easy to misconceptualize exactly what's happening, especially if you're from a culture, or from, how do I put this? If you're older, you haven't actually played a whole lot of games in your life. If you don't actually have the perspective or the wherewithal to understand gaming in general, then I don't think that anybody without the proper credentials should ever be able to diagnose or even consider utilizing the term gaming disorder, especially when talking, like, parents talking about their kids or something like that. I think this is definitely something that has to be carefully navigated by a specialist that is capable of understanding what the criteria is for diagnosing the disorder, and then also understanding that maybe it's not just a problem with gaming, but that there's something else happening. And of course, this is where we bring in like psychiatrists and stuff like that. And that happens with gambling disorder as well. That happens with other addictions. I think I agree with you, Jonathan, that there needs to be a certain, like, everybody needs to just kind of hit the brakes and say, hold on a second, let's not start pointing fingers and say that our kids have problems, that the guy in his mid-30s has an issue because he's a gamer. Like, I don't think that's where we need to be.
I would have to agree with that.
Do we have any more thoughts about gaming disorder in general? I know I kind of...
Well, I personally, I think what a lot of the thing is that they're trying to be in front of something that could potentially be a long-term issue. It's not a hidden fact here that, like, there is a potential problem with overexposure to gaming in excess, but that like, we've stated many times before, that goes for anything, that's what defines an addiction. But I think at best what they're trying to do is have a point where they can allocate funds for research and try to find the real causes for these particular problems. And, like you said in the beginning of the show, is that initially you kind of felt like, oh, this is just an attack to my culture and this and the other thing. But if you look at it from a positive perspective and say, like, there are people out there, the 3% out there that are really dealing with issues with this, maybe there isn't proper funding for long-term diagnosis of these problems. So I think that is the good importance of having something like this in, recognized at a world level, as opposed to just saying this is a localized thing or an American thing that we're dealing with now. So that ultimately is pretty important for long-term care for these particular things. But you can't automatically say that internet gaming disorder is something that's less viable than something like people watching too much football. That's certainly an issue in and of itself, but that's the other side of the token there, that just because we are gamers, we're not gonna, we may not necessarily look at this the same way. But if you said tomorrow that there's, we're gonna diagnose football disorder, watching sports disorder, I think people in those circles would have the same kind of reaction that you yeah, right, like 100%, man. I think if you address that to them, they would have that same reaction, until you let them take a step back from the situation, just look at everything as a whole and say, hey, look, like, I mean, I play a lot of games. Like, me personally, I play a lot of games, and I'm not afraid to say that. It's my release from the things of daily life. But, apparently that could be potentially damning if I was foregoing my responsibilities as a husband, a father, a full-time employee at a company that pays me. That would be a problem, like, so.
Absolutely.
But this can be applied to everything, and I think they want to get in front of this long term. I think if you put this into the same perspective as sports, there's other things. Sports have been around much longer, obviously, so it's not gonna have as great an impact on the culture, because the culture is embedded more than gaming culture is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. And to kind of shift the focus of the conversation, I think at some point we have to relinquish the idea that most of this that any of this can ever be controlled by anyone other than the individual or the person responsible for themselves, right? Like I know that earlier in the conversation I mentioned, what's the responsibility of the AAA game devs? And, we mentioned how parents can get involved, but really what it comes down to is how does each person individually perceive their level of play, or, whether or not they themselves have the control to take that 6-hour break, or to stop playing, or to enjoy the weekends with their families, or to not forego anything that they themselves would deem important.
I agree.
Yeah.
Good deal. Do we have anything else to say about gaming disorder in general?
I think it's not. Go ahead, John.
I think that this is probably a good stopping point for us, because we've pretty much covered everything without running in a complete circle on everything.
Yeah.
So I think the proper way to close this is, if you think you know somebody that might be heading down a path that's not healthy for them, whether they're part of the 3% or they're just gaming far too much, there are avenues for them, just like there are avenues for suicide prevention, for depression, for all of that. There are sobered gamers. That's an odd thing to say, but it's
but entirely relevant.
Okay. Yes. There are sobered gamers who have set up communities to help these people. Reddit has a subreddit called Stop Gaming. It gets filled with trolls, but you have to sift through them, and there are people in there who are willing to help. Okay. There's also a group called Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous. It's much like Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not quite sure how they communicate, but I mean, you can look them up. They have a 12-step program to help people that have, fallen down the rabbit hole and have lost their way. So if you know anybody and you think that they may need help,
or if you yourself feel like you need help,
there are avenues for you or them to receive the help that they need. So please get them into the direction that's going to be a healthier set for them and yourself. Absolutely.
I love it. Do we want to go ahead and sign off?
You can find me on Twitter at Infected Ground Zero. That's I&O at the front and the end, and no vowels in the middle because I'm too poor to buy any.
All right, and I'm Hoosier Boy. You can find me at mixer.com/Hoosier Boy. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hoosier Boy Mixer. You can find me under YouTube, but that's complicated, so just go to my Mixer channel. You'll find me everything there, and that'll be it.
You can find me on all social platforms at Lupo to the Rescue.
And I am Andy, the narrator, wherever you may be.
If you want to keep up with Insert to Join, be sure to check us out at inserttojoin.podbean.com, where you can also follow us at Insert to Join on Twitter.
That's going to be it for this segment. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation about gaming disorder and some of the Insert to Join podcast crew's thoughts and insights to gaming disorder. And once again, would like to reiterate that if you or someone you know is having any trouble at all with gaming, there are resources out there available. Just make sure that you take the time to try and get to those resources. And there are tons of people out there who would love to help. Thanks a lot for joining, but I gotta ask, next time, will you insert to join?